Hey, Witch Mob. Welcome to the Who Is This Crazy Hag podcast.
After a forced break, it's been a long road to get back here. I had to travel, then I was injured, and the recovery process kept me away from writing and recording. It's quite painful to sit for long periods, so I'm not spending much time on the laptop. It feels a bit like a step backwards. I was chugging forward and getting shit done, and then suddenly I'm on my ass and totally useless. This story runs in a similar vein about trying to move forward and then being forced to go back. This actually happened on this particular trip because I am and always have been a forgetful idiot, and it could have been avoided. Join me on a journey around Vietnam, ending with a cruise in Halong Bay, where I meet some really nice people and some not so nice. Please follow on Spotify and share the podcast with your friends. If you like this story and you feel generous, buy me a cup of coffee. The link is in the show notes. Thank you all for being here, and please enjoy this story.
If your ideal vacation includes lounging in hammocks and reading books, Secret Garden could be the perfect spot for you. From observing iguanas to watching hummingbirds, picking fresh tropical fruit from the garden, and walking to the beach, you can do as little or as much as you like. Secret Garden is an eco-house where you can get away from it all and truly relax. Make your booking on Instagram or Facebook at Secret Garden Mompiche. The links are in the show notes. Use the code WITCHPOD for a 20% discount on a 6-day stay.
This story takes place in Vietnam, and it's called Lost Property. It's a scarcely known fact that I am descended from dragons. My mother was renowned as the Dragon Lady when I was in high school. I'm not sure exactly where the moniker originated, but I always thought it was because she'd walk into a room and breathe fire all over everyone, thereby sending up in flames whatever fun might be taking place at the time. So she was called always the Dragon Lady by pretty much everybody I knew. Coincidentally, the translation of Halong Bay is literally Descending Dragon Bay in Vietnamese. Therefore, the region around Halong Bay seemed like the perfect place for a dragon daughter to set up camp for a little while. Years later, when I started taking shrooms, there's a dragon that always shows up in my hallucinations. So maybe I also have the dragon gene. After spending several weeks ambling around Hanoi and taking in its wonderful historical and cultural sites, I was ready to move on. Preparing to leave the chaotic city, I went to Hanoi train station, Ga Hanoi, which looked just like a giant radiator pulled straight out of a truck engine, and bought a single-seat ticket on the Reunification Express train to Haiphong. The train would leave the following morning and was due to arrive around midday. Set at the head of the Red River Delta, Song Hong, Hanoi had been a fun place to visit. When I arrived at Noi Bai Airport from Laos, a guy on a motorbike offered me a ride into town. Just as I was thinking it must be some kind of scam, several Vietnamese emerged from the building with light packs, jumped on the backs of motorbikes, and zoomed away. I was rethinking my first impression when two backpacking girls flagged down a taxi. "Are you going into the old quarter?" they asked. Why don't you come with us? The taxi ride was long, over an hour. Traffic was thick and slow. The battered license taped to the dashboard said our driver's name was Tan. On the freeway, two pretty girls sat astride a small scooter, all dressed up in frilly pink skirts and polka dot tops, ready to go out. Smiling and laughing, they passed our yellow taxi, chatting back and forth as they rode towards the city. Less than 5 minutes later, they were splattered on the road. One of the girls was convulsing. There was blood everywhere. Tan navigated around the accident without blinking. Traffic didn't slow down. In the car, we were in momentary shock. My heart went out to the parents, who would never hug their beautiful daughters again. Tan drove into the old quarter and immediately got lost. The impossible one-way street system wasn't helpful. In Laos, I had been given the business card of a hotel in Hanoi that a fellow traveller had highly recommended. I handed the card to Tan as we left the airport. The girls had figured they could find a hotel when they arrived, and my destination suited them perfectly. Driving around Hung Buk in circles, Tan became irritated until he finally asked another taxi driver for directions. What is it with men and asking directions? It's an international conundrum. At last, he located the street, then found our hotel, and all three of us climbed gratefully out of his car. The curt receptionist checked me into a recently renovated room that hadn't quite been finished. I put down my backpack on a rickety table that leaned next to an unpainted plaster wall, then stretched out on the double bed and napped for an hour in the cool but poorly lit room. For that day at least, it would be home, I thought. In the end, I spent almost 3 weeks in what turned out to be the coolest and quietest room in the hotel. It was dark when I woke, so I went out to eat a delicious bowl of steaming pho in a local street stall, then went back to bed. It was the beginning of a lifelong love affair with pho. There is nothing quite like freshly made Vietnamese noodle soup made from richly spiced broth, linguine-shaped rice noodles, ban pho, fresh herbs, and julienne vegetables, usually served with paper-thin slices of beef or chicken, which are placed raw into the bowl and cooked in the hot broth. The soup is then garnished with fresh bean sprouts. On one occasion, I saw a scoop of tiny live fish dropped into someone's bowl. They jumped around for several seconds before being cooked in the soup. The days were filled with sightseeing. The impressive Ho Chi Minh Museum with its mausoleum, Ho Chi Minh's final resting place, was first on the list. I had an interest in Ho Chi Minh solely because he was a chef and I was a chef, and that was the extent of my interest. This cold grey marble edifice actually contains the revered leader's embalmed remains, and hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese visit each year to soak up their own culture and pay homage to Ho Chi Minh. Behind the mausoleum is the bright yellow presidential palace, the former home of the Governor-General of Indochina. Not far away, next to a pond stocked with carp, is the Stilt House, which was Ho Chi Minh's home and workplace from 1958 until his death in 1969. Just as a side note, my father was actually in Vietnam during that time, while Ho Chi Minh was the leader of Vietnam. While walking around the grounds of these extraordinary monuments, a young Vietnamese man approached and asked if I would stand in a photo with him. Aware of the relatively harmless scam where Asian men have their photo taken with a Western woman and then show off their girlfriend to all of their friends, I politely declined. He tried to take a sneaky shot as I walked away, but my face was covered by my hat. Cheeky bugger. This scam is quite popular in Asia and in parts of the Middle East. The one-pillar pagoda, which was built by Emperor Li Tai-tong, dates back to the 11th century and is regarded as one of Vietnam's iconic Buddhist temples. Legend has it that Li Tai-tong was unhappily childless, and one night he had a dream about meeting with Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of great compassion, who handed him a baby boy while seated on a lotus flower. Shortly afterwards, Li Tai-tong married a peasant girl, and she bore him a son. In 1049, the temple was constructed as a gesture of his gratitude. It is said that a Buddhist monk named Tien Tui instructed the emperor to erect a single pillar in the middle of a lotus pond, similar to the one he had seen in his dream, and designed the temple atop the column to symbolize a lotus emerging from the lake. It was such a peaceful place. I spent several hours reading on the grass under a shady tree nearby, until a surly guard ordered me to move along. To know what you know, and what you do not know, that is true knowledge. It was kind of mind-blowing to learn the Temple of Knowledge, literature, is dedicated to Confucius. Vietnam's first national university, King Li Tan-tong, constructed the temple in 1070. The turtles impress me the most. One of the nation's 4 holy creatures, they represent knowledge. In 1484, the king erected 116 steles of carved blue stone turtles with elaborate motives to honour talent and encourage study. Education was considered quintessential to the Vietnamese culture. Over the weeks, I went to the Citadel and the Flag Tower. Several irate women chased me out after I took a photo of a big pile of war junk. Between bowls of pho, leisurely siestas, and haggling with merciless cyclo drivers — a cyclo is a bicycle rickshaw — I saw as much as I could. There was also a massive shoe market, a lamp and lantern market, and of course the local food markets. Being transported around the city in a cyclo was an edgy combination of relaxed sightseeing and heart-stopping terror as we drove into oncoming traffic, which included at least one city bus, dozens of cars, and hundreds of motorbikes. The Hanoi Hilton, Hoa Lo Prison, and the Women's Museum kept me enthralled. One afternoon, I paid 20,000 dong for a ticket to the water puppet show, purportedly the best in Vietnam. The show didn't start for an hour, so I wandered around Hoan Kiem Lake, Lake of the Returned Sword, and walked over the wooden, red-painted Huck Bridge to Jade Island. Back on the lake shore, I discovered an open-air cafe serving ice cream sundaes. It was difficult to think of a better way to pass an hour. It would have been perfect if the service hadn't been so atrocious. I passed the time reading Time Out and the Vietnam Times until my order was finally delivered. Slowly, I devoured a triple chocolate fudge sundae. 20 minutes before the water puppet show started, I was ready to leave. 15 minutes passed while I tried in vain to get someone's attention so I could pay. Going over to the counter made no difference. Actually, in that place, I felt like I was absolutely invisible, that no one could see me. The whole time I was sitting at the table, trying to get somebody's attention, and the whole time I was standing at the counter, I felt like I may have been wearing an invisibility cloak because nobody looked at me. It was the weirdest experience. Finally, I walked out. I would miss the puppet show if I waited any longer. Despite some of the setbacks, one has to love a country that uses dong as currency. Ding dong. The stale water inside the puppet theatre emitted powerful aromas reminiscent of a swamp with a sewage leak. The stench was so overpowering that a blustering fart would have gone undetected. I had wondered why the ticket collectors were handing out fold-out fans in an air-conditioned building. The fan wasn't enough to keep my eyes from watering. Desperate, I wrapped my shirt around my face so I could breathe. The puppet show itself was funny and entertaining and performed quite skillfully, but the appreciative crowd couldn't get out of the building fast enough. It's probably in the top 10 worst smells I've ever had in my nose in my entire life. Definitely, ew. Apocalypse Now was the club in Hanoi to see and be seen. The young Vietnamese were just as keen to drink icy cold beer and dance to ear-splitting rock music as anyone else in the world. Many a night had passed at the packed nightclub with backpacker friends I met on my travels around the city. Frequently, we arrived back in Hang Bak just before dawn and kept through the hotel, hoping not to wake anyone. Unwisely, I chose to party hard the night before I left Hanoi. Under the cold, stern gaze of the receptionist, I slinked down the hall to my room just after sunrise. I had a train to catch, and going to sleep was too risky. Long Bien railway station wasn't much to look at. The grimy, faded yellow building was the starting point for the train trip to Haiphong, but the journey itself turned out to be an interesting feature. It was a bit of a magical mystery tour. I didn't know what I was getting myself into, and no one in my immediate vicinity was able to enlighten me. It was wait and see what happens from beginning to end. Stone-faced officers at Long Bien Station were grimly enthusiastic about their jobs, closing the gate at the appointed time, regardless of whether the passengers who hadn't yet made it through had paid for tickets or not. Several disgruntled souls howled in protest. The train pulled out exactly at the appointed time, the epitome of German efficiency, and chugged down the line, stopping at all points between Hanoi and Haiphong. The Vietnamese railway was built in the 1880s during the French occupation, and some of the carriages seemed as though they had been puffing down the meter-gauge tracks since that era. Apparently, I was in the wrong seat, thrown out unceremoniously by a snarling ticket collector, even though there was no one waiting for that particular seat. She didn't indicate where I should be sitting instead. A close inspection of my crumpled ticket failed to reveal any information. Of course, it was all written in Vietnamese with weird numbers in weird places, and I couldn't see what was what, and obviously nobody there was going to help me out because those people weren't really very friendly at all. While buying the ticket, I hadn't been made aware of different fares or seat options. Seatless and lost on the train, I hung out in the hallway until the same woman came and led me to another seat, not as comfortable as the one I had chosen for myself. As it turned out, I was the only foreigner on the train, and somewhat a curiosity for my fellow passengers. No one spoke English, but everyone within staring distance made sure to take a good long look. To avoid the discomfort of feeling like a rare museum exhibit, I buried my nose in the novel I'd been carrying around. Out the window, undulating rice paddies stretched out as far as the horizon. About half an hour into the trip, a meal arrived. Trays were tightly packed into catering trolleys, similar to those used by airlines. A uniformed woman marched down the aisle and snapped down the tray table in front of me, as if I was incapable of performing such a simple act. No one else in the carriage had this service performed for them. Placing the open book upon the idle tray, I read until the women closed in with the trolley. Soon, a square plastic plate with dividers was slammed down. Under the lid were 5 sections. One contained steamed rice. Another contained a mishmash of soggy vegetables. There was a tiny scrape of gelled sauce in the third, and the grey and murky contents of the other 2 remain a mystery to this day. In my experience, everywhere I went, Vietnamese food was amazing. Pho, as previously mentioned, being my favourite. Almost every dish contained fresh, crisp vegetables, aromatic spices, and fresh meats or seafood. The wobbly blobs of glug on that tray were far from representative of the national cuisine. A seasoned traveller, accustomed to feeding myself en route, I quickly replaced the lid on the untouched food and took a bag of fresh fruit and a bottle of water from my bag. Content to utilize the container as a recipient for the peels and seeds of rambutans and longans, I filled the nearly empty sauce section with my organic waste. When the ladies came to collect the food trays, they were none the wiser. Haipong Station was painted bright mustard yellow. The moment the train arrived, chaos ensued. Everyone wanted to get off at once. Hanging back, I returned the book to my day pack and replaced the shoes I had removed for the journey. When the clamour died down, I exited the carriage to the platform and was immediately confronted by a large gaggle of shouting hotel touts. I walked past them, through the station to the street, hoping to find a way to the ferry dock. Halong? Asked an elderly man who was sitting on a tattered suitcase. Yes, Halong, I replied. He gestured towards the corner where a number of taxis waited. As I approached, several taxi drivers called out, Halong? Nodding to the nearest driver, I opened the passenger door and got in. With a wide grin, he jumped into the driver's seat and started the engine. As I settled my pack on my lap, the elderly man opened the back door and ushered his tiny wife into the taxi. When I turned to see them settling onto the seat, they grinned and nodded like a pair of well-coordinated water puppets. Vietnamese freeloaders! It's not the first time I've picked up hitchhikers. Resigned to the fact, I pulled the passenger door shut and we headed to the ferry terminal. Apparently, it was my shout. The weekly supply ship to Cut Bar Island was readying to depart as we arrived at the Ben Bin Pier, and the dock workers hurriedly ushered us to the ticket office before guiding us up the ramp onto the upper deck. There weren't that many people aboard, so I left the old couple to enjoy their journey and found a seat near the window on the other side of the boat. Once again, I was the only Nuai Nuk Nhai on the boat. Everyone else was Vietnamese. They were mostly families with small children. They didn't seem that keen to interact with the tourists. Hogak Lak Loi, they called me, the lost girl. Usually keen to avoid other foreign travellers so I could focus on the culture I was there to explore, I would have appreciated having someone with whom to chat that day. It was a long and lonely 5.5 hours on a slow boat to Biao Harbour and Cat Ba town. Back then, Vietnam was relatively new to tourism. The hotels and restaurants were more accustomed to serving local clientele. Despite the lack of English, using a combination of mime and body language, the friendly hotel manager quickly understood I needed a room. Smiling, he showed me up to the 5th floor and down a narrow corridor to a room with the most incredible view of the bay. We arrived on the balcony just in time to see the magnificent sunset. No words were necessary. Soon afterwards, I ordered grilled fish and stir-fried vegetables in a nearby restaurant, content that my arduous day of travel had ended in such splendor. Cat Ba is the largest island in the Halong Bay region. Cat Ba means Island of Women. Approximately half its mass is designated national park. The island is home to the endangered Cat Ba langur. At that time, there were only about 60 golden-headed langurs left in the wild, and they were under the watchful eye of the Cat Ba Langur Conservation Program. There are now, more than 20 years later, about 80 langurs left in the wild. The national park includes both terra firma and marine reserves in its 150-kilometre square area. Wild animals residing in the park also include civet cats and oriental giant squirrels. Cat Ba also features a World War II Japanese fortress offering breathtaking panoramic views of Halong Bay from its long-abandoned battlements, which were also utilized by the French and Vietnamese during subsequent conflicts. One plaque stated these guns could once launch a projectile at an enemy situated 40 kilometers away. After a steep 10-minute climb to the entrance gate and a 20-minute hike to the fort in stifling humidity and temperatures well over 30 degrees Celsius, the view from the top was my reward. Hot and sweaty, I strode past the gun emplacements and sat down on a rampart to take in Cat Ba's rolling emerald hills. Thick jungle poured down rugged, craggy slopes towards a colourful array of local fishing boats dotting the harbour below. Further out, the entire bay was peppered with impressive limestone casts jutting out of the water as far as the eye could see. Vietnam offers no better vista. Several days passed leisurely as I explored the island and relaxed on its sandy beaches. Living in Halong Bay was not the same as touring it. I got to know a few locals, even if I couldn't communicate more than a few words, and they greeted me with smiles as I passed each day. Khan, the hotel owner's son, spoke a smattering of English, and so did Dai, the guy who owned the bar down the street. He was the one who recommended I cruise across Halong Bay in a junk. "My friend will be here in 2 days. You should go with him," suggested Dai. International tourism in Vietnam was still in its infancy, and the mass-market tour companies had not yet been established. The junk would pick up anyone who wanted to sail across the bay to Halong Bay City via a zigzag route to take in the sights. It was a one-way journey and included lunch and several stops to see the grottos and to swim. It would cost $20. As the time neared to move on again, I couldn't think of a better way to go. There were several Vietnamese tourists in Cat Ba who were also keen to cross the bay. At the bar, Guy introduced me to Lan, who spoke a little English. "We leave at 7, he said, grinning at Di. "You pay on the boat." The following morning, 12 people boarded Lan's junk. Naturally, I was the only Ngoan Nhok Nhai. As I took my seat, the Vietnamese tourists giggled. We cruised away from Cat Ba, heading past Monkey Island, when I realized my passport was back at the hotel on Cat Ba Island. I'd concealed it and my money belt in a safe place in my room and forgot to pack them the previous night. Unwilling to walk the streets with all my ready money and reluctant to leave it in my backpack, I usually found a hidey hole in which to stash my cash and passport whenever I travelled, only taking a little money out with me. It was the first time I'd ever forgotten it. It was simple. I needed to go back, except that now I didn't have enough cash to pay for the return trip. Rather than panic, I chose to enjoy the day on the bay. When the opportunity arose, I explained my dilemma to Lan. "Oh no, that's bad. That's really bad," he said, eyes wide. "It's okay. They're in a safe place," I assured him. "No one will find them. I just need to get back there somehow. But I have no money. It's all in Cat Ba." Okay. I find boat, you go back. No problem." He returned to the galley to help cook lunch. Considering the issue sorted, I climbed onto the roof of the junk and dive-bombed into the crystal blue water below. Not wanting to be outdone by a woman, all the men scrambled up to the roof. Before that, they were happily diving off the lower deck. I had soundly challenged them. Now they had to face their fears. 2 men backed out and returned to the lower deck, amid whistles and catcalls from the other men. Laughed into the water, they jumped off the boat and swam around the other side. I hauled myself back onto the wooden junk and climbed the ladder to the roof again. There was one last man who hadn't yet jumped. When I appeared, he squealed loudly and leapt off the roof, barely missing the guardrail, before landing on his side in the water. That must have hurt. If it did, he refused to show it. Laughing, I jumped again. It's wonderful how laughter can bond people together. Over lunch, even though I didn't understand each word, I understood the conversation was centered around our jumps. The men were impressed by my bravery. "They've never seen a girl jump from so high before," translated Lan. "They should get out more," I laughed. Around the table, laughter was the common language, as large dishes of food were handed up and down. The women giggled and passed me plates with traditional local foods to sample: fried fish, squid sausages, crab soup, sea snails in ginger sauce, and a sip or 3 of pink rao naan, rice wine and clam juice. Everyone screamed with laughter at the disgusted look on my face when I tasted it. The more we ate and drank, the more fun we had, and by the end of the cruise, I had several new friends who didn't speak a syllable of English. Just after midday, we parted company with handshakes and smiles. Lan told me to stay aboard while he sought out a ride back to Cat Ba. He came back shortly. "Follow me," he said, leading the way across the decks of several rocking junks until we reached the boat I was to travel on. "Go with him." A surly man with a deeply furrowed brow grunted as I boarded his boat. I don't know what Lan had told him, but he was not a happy man. Despite his churlish demeanour, I was grateful he had agreed to take me back to the island. He shoved me into a corner and went back to the dock to collect his paying passengers. Actually, the man was an absolute bastard, but he had agreed to take me back. So I couldn't really say anything about the way that he behaved or the way that he treated me. The return trip to Cat Bar wasn't nearly as pleasant. I curled up in a corner and alternately read my book, dozed, and enjoyed the fantastic views of Halong Bay's never-ending limestone casts, leaping dramatically out of the azure sea. By the time we arrived in Cat Bar, I was tired and hungry, but more eager to collect my things. Khan was surprised to see me. We cleaned the room. There was nothing there, he said when I told him what happened. Can I check? I asked, hoping no one had discovered my secret hiding place. Of course. He accompanied me to the room on the 5th floor and opened the door. My passport and money were in exactly the same place I left them, inside a travel belt, concealed in a tiny alcove behind the picture frame on the wall. The astonished look on Khan's face told me he didn't even know the niche existed. Is this room occupied? I asked Khan. I'll have to stay in Cat Bar tonight and work out how to leave sometime tomorrow. Yes, of course you can stay here. You're most welcome. He handed me the key and left me to watch the sun dip below the horizon. Before I went to bed, I tucked my passport and money into the secret compartment in my small day pack to make sure they accompanied me on the journey back to Hanoi. The absurd consequences of being forgetful can become an adventure in itself. Leaving important documents behind in a hotel room when you're traveling can be a real pain in the ass. This was the first time that happened, but I did it again a few years later in Malaysia. At the Kuala Lumpur airport, I realized I didn't have my passport. Luckily, I was able to call a hotel and they couriered it over. Miraculously, I did not miss my flight. Twice is enough in one lifetime, and it hasn't happened since.
Hey there, love bugs! Welcome to the jungle! I'm Nancy Miarelli, your guide to the ecological and entomological, i.e. bug, wonders of Ecuador. With my master's in entomology and a passion for ecology and conservation, I'm here to take you on an unforgettable adventure through the mega diverse forests and more lush than you may have expected mountainsides of Ecuador. This year, I'm excited to offer 2 unique science-focused tours. Join me for a nature journaling course where we'll sit in the grass, sketch, observe, and reflect on all the creatures and plants that we discovered. Or dive deep into evolutionary theory on my evolution tour, where you'll see what you learned in a book that one time growing on the side of a tree. Ready to embark on a journey of discovery? Visit www.scibugs.info, that is Scibugs, SCIBUGS, to learn more or find me, Scibugs, everywhere on the internet. Let's explore Ecuador and all it has to offer together.
Do you have any crazy travel stories? What's the most insane thing that happened to you while you were on the road? If you'd like to share, send an MP3 recording of your story or write it into an email and send it to thewitchmob@gmail.com, and it could feature in a future episode. The Who Is This Crazy Hag podcast is created, written, read, produced, edited, mixed and published by BooksByRoni. If you'd like to grab a copy of Few Are Oo, Travel Tales I Never Told Mom, find the paperback on Amazon or email thewitchpod@gmail.com to get an ebook. Also, let us know via email or on Blue Sky at The Witch Pod if you're reading in a book club or a group of friends so we can give you a shout out. don't forget to tell us where you are in the world. You can visit The Witch Pod on Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music and Castbox, and also Substack and Patreon. See you next week.
Bye!